Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, 𝗘𝐀𝐥𝐚𝐭𝐞𝐝, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, 𝗘𝐀𝐥𝐚𝐭𝐞𝐝.
Welcome in, 𝗘𝐀𝐥𝐚𝐭𝐝 with Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you again for those that are following us on Facebook Live. We appreciate that very much. We want to continue to grow the audience as much as we can, as many people as we can. For almost 8 years, the focus has been the same. For those that maybe are listening to the podcast for the first time, it's been education and information, and that was my focus, my objective from day one. We continue to do that, and we work really hard to have great guests like today, panels, information, content to really bring that to you, the consumer. So for more information, you could always go to RERadiolive.com. However, we'd love to have you download the podcast. That's really the way to listen to the show, follow the show. A lot of great series we started here. Actually, started in 2018, but now we're continuing in 2019. We're going to talk about that as one of them today as well. So where do you get the podcast? Really anywhere. You go online and enter Real Estate Radio Live, Stitcher, iTunes, our website. Just enter Real Estate Radio Live. The podcast will come up. You could download it just about anywhere. All right, today we're doing our our series we've been started. Did we start this? We started late last year, right, Steve?
It was in December, I think.
Yeah, it was December. So Steve 𝗤𝗏𝗡 is with us with 𝗪𝗏𝗘, and he and his partner Mark from time to time. Typically we do these on Mondays, for those that are tracking it. But the ongoing series is Accessing Home Wealth Without Debt. Again, Accessing Home Wealth Without Debt. You know me, if you've been, again, following the show, I'm a big fan of really bringing products, services, different things to the marketplace and educating the consumers that could be a benefit or just another option. And this is an exciting program we've been talking about for about 2 months now. We're going to continue to 2019. So with that, Steve, I'll ask you again, for those that are just tuning in for the first time, listening to podcasts, if you give us a quick overview of your background and tell us a little bit about 𝗪𝗏𝗘 and the new program, and then we'll also have you introduce our other guest that's with us today.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah.
My background is really, I always like to say everything I know is not from great insight. It's more painful experience.
It's the best.
But I have 25 years plus years of experience. Started it with Smith Barney Shearson as a financial consultant. And for a great period of my career, 15 years plus, you're always trying to figure out ways for individuals predominantly to basically maximize return, minimize risk, outpace inflation, manage investments. And one of the things that came through those years is we were always dealing with, you look at taxes, you look at savings, you look at stocks, bonds, mutual funds. The one component that was left out was actually where people have about 70% of their net worth tied up, and that's their home. And so there were a couple of different iterations and interactions with financial institutions. We identified groups and identified products that would allow homeowners to actually intelligently access home wealth without taking out a loan and while keeping and protecting their current equity. In this series that we have endeavored to with you, and obviously we've been working together for a few years, it's really come into its own now, where the majority of homeowners are what we call house rich but cash poor. As we always talk about, the home is a non-financial asset, meaning that it cannot be readily converted to cash, and it is something that, especially here in the Bay Area, but pretty much anywhere in California or any of the areas in major metropolitan areas, a huge concentration of wealth. People are living longer, and they're looking for ways to intelligently either access that wealth for purposes of diversification or liquidity, or ways to, how am I going to generate more income in retirement? And so today I also brought a good associate of mine, Steve 𝗔𝗕𝗓𝗏. Steve works with Alain Pinel. And maybe, Steve, you could give a little of your background and some of the things that you're seeing in your local markets with homeowners.
Welcome in, Steve. Good to have you.
Hey, Joe. Thanks. Steve, it's great to have the opportunity to come in and talk with you guys. I've been selling real estate on the peninsula for a little over 20 years. And focus mostly in San Mateo, Foster City, Burlingame, kind of mid-peninsula area. And to hear what you guys are doing, and Steve, and ways to find for people to reach in and get the wealth out of their property to help them stay where they are or maybe make other intelligent decisions with the money is really incredible because it really helps a lot of people out. I can just tell you a quick little story. I had a lady last year. I was looking to help her sell. We went in to look at a property. The property's worth about $3 million. She's been their original owner, and she's basically living in the dining room, family room, and the kitchen. And to get upstairs to take a shower, things like that, had to have other family come over and help her out. But just didn't know how or which ways to go to be able to get some of that out so she could actually go take the funds, go do something else, and to be able to offer different things so people could find a way to live more comfortably. She was probably in her late 70s or so, and just really could find ways to be able to get the funds out of the property so she could just live more comfortably, which was just to be able to recommend someone like Steve or something like that, give some options is just is
that's a great testimony. I'm glad you shared it because stories are always great, especially in radio and podcasts, because you get the vision, the image of this, and Steve and I talk about this all the time, and so I'm glad you kind of kicked that off with that story because we see that all the time, elderly people just kind of stuck in some ways, and it's sad but if they don't have family members that are really keep an eye on them, and there could be the situation, again, the whole idea here is how do you access that without debt, right? It's easy for someone to say, oh, you need $200,000, just go get a home equity line or refinance. Well, that's not everybody, especially a senior citizen, could do that. Number one, do they want to burden themselves with that monthly debt? And that frightens people to death in some cases. So thanks for sharing that story. It's a good one. Yeah, I
think realtors it's funny having a pair of Steves. So but when you have realtors that it's not about the transaction.
Right.
This is one of the reasons I brought Steve on board, or that I work closely with him. It's about the relationship or being a center of influence in the community. A lot of people will talk to a realtor to understand what's the pulse, what are you seeing, what's moving, et cetera, in the market, what do you think my house is worth, all these types of things. And a lot of times people want to know that, not necessarily because they're thinking about buying or selling their home. They're really trying to do that mental math of like, gosh, how much am I really worth if I needed to? So one of the things that we do with realtors like Steve is we really try to educate homeowners. There's really three things that you can do. You can buy, you can sell, or you can stay.
Right.
And Steve, I don't know what the percentages of how many people buy or sell, but I might guess, and I'm going out on a big limb here, that most people are staying, right?
Most.
Yeah, quite a few people are staying now. They're waiting. They have so much equity built up in their house, and for tax ramifications, things like that. They're kind of staying where they are and trying to find different ways, like you come up with, to kind of make things happen.
Yeah, what I want to interject right now as I'm listening to you guys, which is an important note for those listening to this podcast, is I want to just take a minute here and spell out, and you heard me talk about this all the time, how important relationships are and who you work with. And Steve's a perfect example as a realtor in the sense that, if he meets with you, someone like Steve's character and what he'll do, he'll meet with you and talk about all your options. And I'm not throwing a blanket over the entire industry, whether it be lending or real estate, Steve, but your intent should go in to find out what you could do, what's best for that homeowner, right? And I would guess that most people would be walking into a home like that thinking, I'd love to sell this place.
Yeah, they're looking at it somewhere where it's between $2.5 or $3 million, and what's the commission going to look like? But in living in the community and being a part of that, the most important thing is what's right for this person.
Absolutely.
So having the tools in which to be able to set them in a direction in which it would be most important for them. If they want to stay, how can they do it?
Right.
And how can you make the home safe for her? And how is she going to be able maybe whether it's have people come in and take care of her, those type of things, and what's it going to cost? So it's a complete analysis of not just what's the home worth, but what are you going to do and with the money, and how is it going to make it better for you? What does the process look like, and where you want to get to, and what's the time frame? So you kind of work through all that with somebody, and then you come to the conclusion, or actually, they come to the conclusion of what's best for me.
Yeah.
Do I sell the house and move somewhere? Do I need a care facility? Or is it possible to do the corrections or do the things at a home to stay here for the long term? Is it manageable? Is it going to work? So providing all of those tools so that then they can make a good decision for themselves. Yeah. And then, you feel good about yourself at the end, whether they move or they stay, because then you're helping them live a better life is how I see it.
Good point. So, Steve, talk a little bit about, because this is an educational process, right? We're listening to Steve. He's educated realtor. He understands.
I had to educate Steve before I brought him on here.
So this is really why we do the show, partly because, there's a lot of other vehicles, but we need to educate the consumers, but also the workforce in general. So talk a little bit about that importance and what your goal is here and some of the ways people could actually use this. Let's jump into that too.
Sure. Well, let me just take off from where we identified this and then how we started developing it. What we see in the marketplace is a homeowner that has the majority of their net worth in their home has never really been approached or doesn't really even think about it as a manageable asset.
True.
Okay.
Right.
And the reason that they don't normally think about it as a manageable asset is up until most recently, in the last 4 or 5 years, these types of products weren't available for you to hedge, diversify, access wealth without taking on debt. So you basically, in other markets, in the commercial markets, commercial real estate, you have debt, you have equity, you have convertible debt, you have notes, you have different instruments.
Right.
The residential homeowner basically starts day one, says, I need a roof over my head. He puts down, say, 20%, and he borrows 5 times that amount, okay, and he keeps making payments for the next 30 years.
Right.
The only way he thinks that he could access it, he or she, is by taking out a loan.
Right.
So what we do is basically come in, and we've developed a set of tools, and we've developed relationships with folks like realtors, and we collaborate. We basically look at a situation and say, how much do you have in, say, savings or assets outside of your home? Then how much is your home relative to your overall? And when they see that pie, you see the traditional view is I've got my savings, retirement, and that's the only picture that normally financial planners look at. But when you start to think about it and say, what could I do if I were able to access some of that wealth in my home without taking on debt? I'm not saying that you wouldn't take on debt.
Sure.
Maybe you do some combination.
Sure.
A whole world of possibilities open up.
Right.
So the folks that are coming into situations where, in Steve's case, or with his example, well, I need to modify the house. What's the right modification and for how long? Maybe it's good for 5 years, but it makes an overall upgrade and then the home is sold 5 years later. Maybe they do an accessory dwelling unit. Or probably more and more is maybe I want to help my kids buy a house, but I don't really want to take a loan out for them. And I want to help them now when they need it without taking on more debt.
You know, the other thing is I'm listening to you. What's interesting is this educational process that's taking place, and it'll take a while, but, you know, you think about over the years, people would say, you know, stay away from the house, and when you have emergency funds, they talk about emergency cash funds and 401, and all that's good. I'm a big believer in that too. But what's really, as I see this, but over the years, and I hope this shift starts to take place in the philosophy and the thought process, is that why in the world would you liquidate a 401k that you saved your entire life for 20 years and take those penalties and take that pension away from retirement when you could potentially look at accessing,
there's a highest and best use assessment that has to happen, and I don't think people actually are educated enough to know what the sequencing might be. There is a right time and place to use a loan, a mortgage, use a product like this, or sell the home. And I think it's that education that we're seeking, but it's really another tool in the toolbox to say, okay, let's try to match up. What I like to educate people on is liability matching. Okay, when you first buy a home, you're levered 5 to 1. Okay, if you were in the stock market as a financial planner, and the financial planner said put 20% down, and we're going to lever it 5 to 1, you would not be in the business. You'd be sued. Okay, but in real estate, because it's so important to have a roof over your head, and there's advantages to it. It's a great forced savings and wealth builder. But later in life, once you have that equity built up, the irony is when you have the greatest amount of wealth, it's usually when you have or are soon to have the least amount of income. How do we switch gears over to converting accumulated wealth into income? And that's really what's facing most homeowners. The other thing is there was a recent, I think it was in December, might have been November, a report came out that said 65% of Americans lose sleep over money worries. Okay, and that's because they don't think of the house. They think that's your worst case, right? Rather than using and thinking through how to plan, right? And I'm sure, Steve, you can some comments on people that are downsizing or ADUs, and what else are you seeing, these stress points around the all or none proposition of real estate.
The main thing I've seen people stressing over is the taxes and what they're going to have to pay in capital gains, which is, first world problems. But, that's in how can I get money out without paying so much in taxes is the biggest thing. I get several of my neighbors have been talking to me about that and what they want to do, and they have grandkids in other areas and they want to move, but yet what do I do with the property and how can I get financing out? So hearing some of your options in that could be, or things that I've talked to them about because it'd be very helpful. It's just coming to that final point where you go, okay, does it make sense? What do I need to do, and how long am I going to use the money? Is basically the end point. As we talked about earlier, am I fixing up the house am I going to rent it out? Where am I going to go with this? And getting to that end goal for that single person, I mean, having the options and things that you show is great to have. I haven't had so many people looking for ADUs yet, but I can see that down the road as they look for different ways to have income in their older years as they have, opportunities to generate some income and things like that off their property.
So Steve, the realtor,
yes,
Realtor Steve.
When you meet with, let's say, a client, you're going on a listing appointment and they want to sell their home and they're considering selling their home. Do you say, gee, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, just out of curiosity, why are you selling your home? Or you just show up and it's just always good? Again, I love information. Is that what's your process when you meet with someone? Even if they say, hey, Steve, we're thinking about selling our home or we want to sell our home, how does that look when you meet with them?
I go through quite a few questions as I want to figure out why they're moving, where they're going and why, and what's their end goal. I mean, is it just to sell the house? What would this look like in a perfect world, and why do you want to go? First, I also like to find out what made them choose that house, because then I go through a whole marketing process of, well, you chose it because you work this close to this business, well, let's market to there. But I do go through a whole process of trying to figure out, why they're going, and what they need the funds for. Are they trying to move up? Is that our goal? Are you trying to downsize? Well, then this is in timing, putting in timing and process and everything so that they get where they want to go when they want to be there. I always have people ask me what's the best time to sell the house, and it's when it's right for you.
Right.
I mean, there's no magic bullet to time the market, but when is it right for you? When does it fit what you need to do? Prices go up, they come down. When you sell and you go to buy something else, well, if you're selling at a high price, you're going to end up buying at a high price. And if you sell at a low price, you're going to buy at a low price. So it's all about the timing for them, but it's the reason why they want to. I dig into that as much as possible because that shows, the speed you need to move and what we might need to do to the house. If you're moving because of a job, sometimes you can't do the things because you don't have the time.
The reason I ask, that's a great dialogue. That's a great script, just a great program to go through, is that someone might say to you, right, Steve, I said, well, gee, we really don't want to sell this place, but we have no choice because we have to put my mom in a care center, right, or something, right? That could come up. And that might trigger what the three of us are talking about today. They may not know this option exists, so here they are getting ready to sell their home because they don't know that they could access maybe capital in this other form.
I would say one of the interesting things at the end of the year, I always go through my numbers and figure out where my sales came from and and this past year, I would say 45% of my sales were from estate sales.
Really?
And going through some of those and talking to people that I've been introduced to, usually by attorneys and that, and hearing I've mentioned some of the products that Steve's had, and I said, wow, wish I would have known that sooner because I could use some of that to help mom. I could use some of that to pay off some of these things that now we're selling the house to pay for, but it would have been nice to take some of that money out then and make things a little easier on us as a family instead of, the last gentleman we just closed about a week ago, he and his sister were paying a lot of things to help pay off because, the bills were getting so much to take care of, the care facility for their mom. So hearing those options could really help out.
And Steve, there's many different things, and maybe, when we'll start talking about the different ways. But as I think about what we're right now, that's a deferral of taxes, right, to some extent.
Yeah, one of the
if someone
things
draws access capital from their home.
Steve just triggered off a huge thing that validated that we see, which is a lot of people have, when we first started talking to different people that these things are available, it's like, where were you last week? Where were you last month? Where were you 3 years ago? I was like, well, I'm here now. And so the way that these products work is, first of all, I always describe them as what they are not.
Okay.
So they're appreciation sharing or home price movement agreements.
Got it.
They're available, now they're even available for rentals or 1 to 4 units. Okay. So they can be owner-occupied. Single-family residence, owner-occupied is most common. There's probably about 5 programs out there.
Okay.
And programs are different because they can vary by term. They may be for 10 years, 15, 30 years. We've even done contracts that have gone as long as 50 years. So the need of the homeowner fits into that decision. But getting back to what these are, it's best described for what they are not, because everybody already. So
point.
It's not a mortgage.
Okay, yep.
It's not a loan. It's not a line of credit, and it is not a reverse mortgage.
Correct.
All of those things are tied to an interest rate, whether it's current pay or deferred. The way that appreciation contracts work, or home equity release contracts, they become different names, or home price movement. The homeowner receives a percentage of the home's value. There's an appraisal. And think of it as just selling a slice, but it's on the future, normally.
Right.
Okay? And on the future, you're going to share in the up or the down. So the investor, and we'll talk about who the investors are in just a minute, and why they do this, and why this is going to be big, and it's growing, is so the investor is actually agreeing to participate in the up or the down movement of the future. The investors are institutions, endowments, foundations, pension funds, because they want exposure to real estate. They're not living at your house. They're not hanging out, couch surfing, and they're not paying any of the taxes. So the homeowner maintains all rights and privileges, and in all these agreements, the homeowner has the ability to buy the contract out. Okay? So this is a deferral for homeowners that say somebody says, I want to fix it up, and I may sell it or I may not. Or I think, real estate's gone up an awful lot, and I got an awful lot of money tied up. Instead of 70% of my net worth, it's now 85. And I want to take a slice of that, and I don't have enough in savings. I don't have enough in emergencies. This allows them to access that capital, and it doesn't matter. Many cases, when you're retired, you can't qualify for a loan, even though you may have a fully paid for home. So it's just basically a balancing tool. So
very good. Well, this is great education. Why don't we talk a little bit about the ways people are using this program, Steve? Because I think that's one of the other things. Is first, we've clarified this is not a debt. It's not a bank lending money. So no payments.
So the first thing is people wipe out debts. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great way to start.
Instead of refining a debt, I'm just going to take it out.
Other
things people have done is home equity lines of credit. They're coming due. They're recasting. We've talked about this.
Point.
They'll wipe that out. By eliminating a debt, you increase your cash flow because the monthly obligations decline. Next set of circumstances or life situations. I have an opportunity to invest in a business. I think the stock market's lower. I want to get into other things that actually have a chance of appreciating more or are not correlated, meaning they don't go up and I got too much risk in the house price movement. Then maybe the third stage is going to be things where they're proactively looking at things like accessory dwelling units. I need to generate cash flow. I want to help my kids buy a home. I want to basically buy a second home. I may want to buy another home and rent out the house because I still may want to, I want to have my foot on first and try to steal second base. Well, you can do that, but it takes capital to do that. And then lastly, probably most importantly that people do this, is comfort cash. They really just don't need more home wealth. They do not want to pay taxes. Okay, and the way that these programs work is, and you check with your accountant, your situation maybe, but generally speaking, the cash that is paid is in the form of it's a forward contract, and tax isn't owed until the contract is settled. So you're able to basically have a long-term capital gain or loss that can be used to reduce the taxes that you might have paid. And I like to say that you're paying this off with maybe 40 cent or 60 cent dollars, right? Because if you're past that exemption of $500,000 if you're married, or $250, you're basically paying that off. You're getting cash today and paying it off with 60 cent dollars.
The other thing I've mentioned several times before, and it's worth mentioning again on a regular basis, is in the last couple of years, roughly 30%, especially 2018, 2007, but roughly 30% of the people I've helped finance purchases where they had gift funds, some kind of gift funds from parents, grandparents, relatives. So again, I would say this is another great vehicle potentially to look at if you want to try to help your child or maybe a grandchild or something with gift funds, right?
Yeah, it's funny, your 30% number. 30% is also
amazing.
the number of people that actually have zero net worth outside of their home. So if you look at car loans, student loans, and if they add those up, it may be so painful that people don't want to look at it. But if you did, this is a way to equalize. You can basically, in a lump chunk, if you access 10 or 15% of your home's value and put it over into the financial column, it's a great equalizer.
And before we just have a couple minutes left, but it's funny you mentioned that because I don't know if you saw, what's the big financial thing that goes on every year? It's going on right now in the location. It's always the same location. It's in somewhere in Idaho or something like that. All the big financial bigwigs speak, and the number one, Steve, the number one concern this year when they did the panels was debt, consumer debt.
Yep.
So think about that. When you're listening to this podcast, it's not just us. It's not just this, I guess what. I mean, the number one concern of the biggest financial institutions right now, the people, the brightest minds when it comes to economics, is the debt.
Yeah, overextended.
Yeah.
Yes, Americans are really good at overextending.
So, before we sign off, again, if you need, those are all the different opportunities. Before we do that, Steve, tell those that could get in touch with you, and then we'll have Steve actually do the same as well.
Sure. There's two places you can go. One is you can go to our website, just general overview on us, and you can reach out to us at barastone.com. That's BARASTONE.com. The other site we have is a general high-level overview, which is homeliquiditytools.com. There's some frequently asked questions and see if these programs might make sense for you.
Very good. And Steve, with APR, or I should say Lampanel, I better get careful with those acronyms. Tell us if those are looking up in the area where you work, or if they want some more feedback or information where they could reach you.
You can email me at steve@stevdroz.com. That's DROZ.com. Or you could look me up on the net. You can look at steve.droz@apr.com, or I also have livingfostercity.com.
Very good. Guys, good show. Thanks again for the information, and we'll have to do this again next Monday.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much.
All
right. Thanks again for tuning in. This is Joe 𝐸𝐶𝐜 with Real Estate Radio Live. Again, for more information, go to 𝗪radiolive.com, and don't forget to download the podcast. Take care. Have a great afternoon.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit 𝗪radiolive.com. That's 𝗪radiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at 𝗪radiolive.com.